Hello everyone, I'm Brazen Eagle and thank you for joining me here. So, today we have an article from CNN about some young South Korean men becoming more and more upset about feminism and its push for radical equality. So, South Korea's young men are fighting against feminism, updated on September 24th from Seoul. On the same street corner in Seoul, where 10,000 South Korean women rallied last October to demand an end to spy cameras and sexual violence, the leader of a new activist group addressed a very small group of angry young men. "We are a group for legal justice, anti-hate, and true gender equality," Moon Sung-ho boomed into a microphone to a crowd of a few dozen men waving placards. As feminist issues come to the fore in deeply patriarchal South Korea, really? Is South Korea that patriarchal? I kind of doubt it. There's a growing discontent among young men that they're being left behind. Moon, who leads Dang Dang We, a group fighting for justice for men, is one of them. He started his group last year after a 39-year-old business owner was sentenced to 6 months in prison for grabbing a woman's buttocks in a Korean soup restaurant. Not a soup kitchen. Oh, it could be a soup kitchen, but at least a soup restaurant. The case provoked outrage that a man could be convicted on no evidence beyond the victim's claims, which is true. While some lashed out at the judge, 29-year-old Moon found another culprit: feminism. Moon and his group held a panel discussion at the National Assembly, Korea's top legislature, in early September to expose what they perceived to be the alleged harms of the movement. Feminism is no longer about gender equality. Well, since when was it ever about gender equality? It is gender discrimination, and its manner is violent and hateful, he said, to applause from his audience of about 40, mostly young men. And honestly, from this picture, is this supposed to be Moon or whatever his name is? Because this looks like a girl. This looks like a very obese girl or a very obese guy. I can't tell. Anyways, I don't support the Pound Me Too movement. Well, why would you? The emergence of mainstream feminist voices and ideas came in response to the brutal murder of a young woman near a subway station in trendy Seoul neighborhood Gangnam in 2016. The perpetrator deliberately targeted a female victim. Oh no. The woman's death triggered an examination of attitudes towards women in the country, which broadened to include campaigns against sexual harassment like the Pound Me Too movement and anti-spy cam protests dubbed #MyLifeIsNotYourPorn. Wow, I have never heard that in my entire life. To many, the discussion was long overdue in the male-oriented South Korea, which ranks well below the global average on the 2018 Global Gender Gap Report, with major disparities in terms of wage equality and earned income for women, which sounds stupid. Campaigners found support from the South Korean government and President Moon Jae-in, who vowed to become a feminist president before he was elected in 2017. Since then, there have been several high-profile prosecutions relating to sexual abuse involving politicians, K-pop stars, and regular men. With each court victory, the disquiet among men, especially young men, begin to build. "I don't support the Pound Me Too movement," said Park, a business student in his early 20s, who vehemently disagrees with the notion that young women today are disadvantaged in society. "I agree that women in their 40s and 50s made sacrifices, but do not believe that women in their 20s and 30s are being discriminated against." Well, they totally are being discriminated against. They're being discriminated positively for them. Anyways, Park is not his real name. He wants to remain anonymous because he fears repercussions for his views. So does Kim, another student in his early 20s who is about to graduate from university. Kim says he sits apart from women at bars to avoid being falsely accused of sexual harassment. Although he was once supportive of feminism, he now believes it's a woman supremacy movement that aims to bring down men. When a woman wears revealing clothes, it's gender violence and sexual objectification. But the same critic will enjoy a similar photo of men. Feminists have a double standard, he said. Both Park and Kim say men, like them, are being punished for the crimes of a previous generation. Patriarchy and gender discrimination is a problem of the older generation, but the penance is all paid by the men in the 20s, Kim said. Park and Kim are not alone. A Real Meter poll last year of more than 1,000 adults found that 76% of men in their 20s and 66% of men in their 30s oppose feminism, while nearly 60% of respondents in their 20s think gender issues are the most serious source of conflict in the country. Wow, alright then. What angers Park and Kim most of all is the nation's policy of compulsory conscription, which forces men their age to serve in the military. At the same time, they think women are getting a leg up from new government programs that help them enter traditionally male-dominated industries. End of old masculinity. For 62 years, South Korean men have been forced to join the army. The tradition, which began with the Korean War, required all able-bodied men between 18 and 35 to serve between 21 to 24 months in the military. But unlike their fathers, today's youths don't believe in this traditional male duty. Moon's government is trying to increase the number of women in the military, where they currently make up around 5.5% of all active troops, according to the latest figures. But right now, women are exempt from compulsory conscription. Park, who was injured during his time in the army, says he got zero benefit from military service. It's unfair that only one gender must serve during their early 20s. We should be pursuing our dreams instead. It's a view backed by surveys of young men conducted last year by Ma Kyung-hee, a gender policy researcher at Korean Women's Development Institute. That sounds like a waste of a position. But anyways, Ma studied 3,000 adult men, found that 72% of men aged in their 20s think that the male-only draft is a form of gender discrimination, which it totally is, and almost 65% believe that women should also be conscripted. Ooh, you want to kill your military? About 83% believe that military service is better to be dodged if possible, and 68% believe it is a waste of time. They're just not concerned about losing 2 years of freedom. They're also worried about missing out on opportunities. If I can't use that time for self-improvement, won't I lag behind women in the job market? Kim asked. Alright, well, I guess that's a good idea. Competition for jobs. In South Korea's hyper-competitive job market, well-paying jobs at large conglomerates are few and far between. In the last 10 years, the youth unemployment rate has jumped from 6.9%, nice, to 9.9%. If you include youth who are working part-time, as well as those who are not in prison, school, or the military, wow, that rate soars to 21.8%. And while the country underwent an economic growth spurt from the 70s to the 90s, the young generation of Korea are working in a sluggish economy. Meanwhile, housing prices remain high. The median price for an apartment in Seoul is $670,000, while median incomes in the city fall short of $2,000 per month. Wow. Excuse me. Competition for jobs is intense, and it has only become more so thanks to government programs to bring more women into the workforce. So you're telling me you're making your economy even more competitive by bringing in more labor. Although the country's education gap is all but closed, women earn less than men in the workforce and are poorly represented in government. In early 2017, the Ministry of Gender Equality, which is a stupid government program, revealed a 5-year plan to expand female representation in ministries, government enterprises, and public schools, even if those females are underqualified. Last February, it was proposed that the plan be extended to the private sector to incentivize large conglomerates to hire more women and change the male-centric corporate culture. But some men say these measures are giving women an unfair advantage. I worry whether I would be disadvantaged in finding employment. Kim said, because before it was a position that I could have easily won by merit. But due to the gender quota, if I don't get the position, it will be unfair. He's not wrong. Park points to women's universities as another example. In South Korea, there are more than a dozen women-only universities and no male equivalent. Sounds like some sort of discrimination. Some of these schools offer courses in highly coveted professions like law or pharmacy, and as the country caps the number of law students, the more places that go to women, the fewer there are for men. In her report, published last year, researcher Ma said South Korea was in a time of infinite competition where it is impossible to find a stable job. This almost sounds like the United States. The older generation of men grew up at a time when women worked in factories, so while many saw women as weaker beings, they understood that women made sacrifices for them. Ma said to men in their 20s, women are seen as a competitor to overcome. The men are not wrong. Women are literally the competition of men in this case. The conflict is being exacerbated by the internet where casual misogyny is being normalized, said Ma. Ma found that men who learned about feminism online were more likely to be anti-feminists than those who acquired information offline. Well, just one way of propaganda. She was also surprised to discover that higher income and higher educated groups were just as likely to hold anti-feminist views as their lower income and lower education counterparts. So you're telling me that people across the spectrum are finding fault with your ideology. Sounds like the ideology has got a couple flaws. And while their fathers saw women as needing protection, Ma found many younger men believe it's women who now hold the power. For them, the Pound Me Too movement, mandatory military service, and government programs for women's advancement are signs that the playing field is tilting against men. Well, it sounds like it already has been tilted against men. Seeking a political voice. Only 2 years ago, men in their 20s overwhelmingly supported President Moon. Now, less than 30% of men in their 20s support Moon, compared to 63.5% of women, according to December's Realmeter poll. The trend, which could be explained by the president's perceived feminist leaning, has prompted some to seek out politicians that reflect their views. But when they look, they find there are few options because there are few options because it is mostly socially unacceptable at the current moment. One is Lee Jun-seok, a 34-year-old senior member of a centrist Bahrain Mirai party who has publicly accused feminists of making an unfair grab for privilege at the expense of men. Well, that's all feminism. A series of YouTube videos titled "A Feminist Being Destroyed" by Lee Jun-seok in debates have more than 4 million views and tens of thousands of comments, almost all praising Lee. As the ruling Democratic Party moves towards women's rights, a generation of men in their 20s and 30s feels clearly lost, Lee says. That's because currently no political party is exploiting the growing number of disgruntled men. We see that here in the United States as well. Lee suggests a party with a strong anti-feminist message could emerge at next year's general election, just as right-wing groups surged in Europe. For now, Bahrain's Mirai's efforts to attract young men seem to be paying off. According to a Gallup poll earlier this year, men in their 20s and 30s were Bahrain Mirai's biggest supporters. Despite the lack of political parties targeting young men, Moon Sung-ho from Dang Dang Wee, is not discouraged. The current social ills that feminism have created wasn't built in a day. It will take time and effort to crumble it. We need to do it gradually, he said. Ma, the researcher, believes that the conflict won't be resolved as long as South Korea has military conscription. I don't know about that. We must stop forcing manhood on men, she said. I don't agree with that either. Society must help men find a new masculinity instead of anti-feminism. I would disagree with all that entire paragraph. But Park and Kim feel helpless to change a society that they think is putting women first. They're not wrong. We are a punching bag, Kim said when asked to describe the status of young men today. He points to how young men are struggling to buy their own homes or even pay for dates. Well, why would you go dating? That seems like a waste of time. At the same time, Park becomes deflated. Men in their 20s are not part of the establishment, just like in the United States. We must follow whatever people in their 40s and 50s say, he said. If everyone could easily get a job and the economy was growing, then maybe, we wouldn't need to fight this much. And that was it from Seoul. That was a long article, and I guess I'll say that about some of CNN's articles. They can be long, and they can appear to be in-depth. Also, if you're wondering what that sound is, I have to drink some water because my voice gets tired out. But anyways, so it sounds like, really, that South Korean men, or at least some South Korean men, are finally realizing that feminism and its allies do not want equality. It's almost as if equality was long achieved in the past. But let's start back up here where we have the title. Now, I'm not huge into South Korean culture or politics, but I doubt that South Korea is deeply patriarchal. I completely don't believe that. I don't see women being told they cannot work and must stay home to raise families. I don't see South Korean women being unable to live their lives independently of men. But I do see South Korean women getting advantages over South Korean men. How does that patriarchal? Now, like other incidents in Western countries, apparently, some business owner, of course, was sentenced to jail for 6 months for allegedly grabbing a woman's butt. Now, this might have happened, but this might not have happened. How do you prove that? You can't prove a negative, and if there were cameras looking, then it would be a different story. You know, I mean, at least for now in the United States, we still have innocent until proven guilty, so I don't know about South Korea, but it sounds like a dangerous place to be, at least socially. Anyways, you see the ideological bent here from CNN with them stating that Moon found another culprit. CNN is acting as if it isn't feminism's fault for the disadvantages that normal men now have. It seems like Moon and a few other young men are finally realizing that feminism is inherently discriminatory and of course, was never about equality. Apparently, the emergence of mainstream feminist voices and ideas came in response to the brutal murder of a young woman near a subway station in trendy Seoul suburb Gangnam in 2016. The perpetrator, which somewhere around here, deliberately targeted a female victim. Oh my gosh, not a female victim. If it was a male victim, it would be okay, right? A woman died. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Most people don't like murder, but I would ask, how many men died in South Korea and were targeted? You know, one woman dies, she was targeted, okay? And what about the men? I know South Korea overall has a pretty low crime rate, but they still have murders, they still have crime in South Korea. Just because one woman dies doesn't mean the entire country has to shut down. What about the men? You never talk about the men. Now, this section goes further on talking about the 2018 Global Gender Gap Report. That means nothing. The only reason that there is major disparities in terms of wage equality, which will never exist, and earn income for women is because women generally take less paying jobs and do less work. But it is interesting to read through this little section of this article that this guy, Park, wants to protect his name because he knows that if his identity would get out, then feminists and their allies would ruin his life. And that's why I, myself, have an alias. If my identity got out, well then I probably, most likely, wouldn't be able to work in my field again. You know, Park realizes that feminists are not for equality and absolutely employ double standards. And of course, I think it was Bob Lewis who once said, feminism was never about equality. But now this next part is quite interesting. Park and Kim say they are being punished for the crimes of a previous generation. We hear that all the time here now in the United States about reparations or anything relating to reparations. So, why should the descendants, let's say of Americans, pay for the descendants of others? If anything, people are lucky to be in the United States. The idea that someone or some people are owed reparations because of the past is a nonsense idea, and people who promote it only want to steal your wealth. Like, think about it. Is Russia going to give reparations to the Ukraine for the history of the relationship between Russia and the Ukraine? I don't think so. But I do like that CNN here brings up the idea of compulsory conscription. I actually have a friend who was in the South Korean military after he was here in the United States because it was required of him. He had his duty. Many men don't want to be in the military, apparently. And at least here in the U.S., people who serve in the military get access to the GI Bill and TRICARE, which is the military's socialized health provider. I'm not saying that TRICARE is great, but I've heard some issues regarding TRICARE. But regarding South Korea's military, I understand, or I can see, that conscription can feel like a chore, but at least in South Korea's case, I would say it's probably necessary for South Korea. But, you know, now South Korean men, they're like, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want to be in the military. We don't see the point of it. It's discriminatory that there's only men signing up for the draft. And you know what? They're right. The men are right. It is discriminatory against men. You know, if anything, I would try to compensate for the men being enlisted. See, I'm sure these men are getting paid. You know, you just can't not pay people to do a job that you are legally forcing them to do. So I'm sure they're getting paid, but, you know, if they're being drafted, give them an option to have, like, the GI Bill or something. I think to at least compensate the men. But, you know, the real meat of this article is about South Korean men and their fight, albeit small, against feminism. Furthermore, as the government pushes for more female representation in all aspects of life, businesses, of course, can make more money, but because you're adding more and more labor to the economy, it's going to suppress wage growth. What happens when you slightly less than double the labor force? Unless or until we hit peak automation, is this really going to help anybody, doubling or slightly less than doubling the labor force? This would only make things like housing more and more expensive. Doing this only creates greater job insecurity. It's one thing if you have like millions of jobs that must be filled in immediately, but they don't. If women take more and more jobs away from men, then men are the losers, but women are even further losers. Because women, they only want to get a job so that they can make some money, so then they eventually can get up to the next rung of men who make even more money than them. You know, if men can't find jobs or make enough money, they won't be able to support a family. Men won't be found nearly as attractive, because if they had money, they'd be more attractive. And of course, females will achieve a greater sense of entitlement when searching for a partner. You gotta understand that females only want at least equal to their level or above. They never want to go below their own level. They will never have a family, they will never have kids, and they will never really care for your country. Doing this right now, South Korea, just like the United States, will kill your country in the long run. But, you know, we have this researcher here named Ma, and she's nuts. This person believes that ending conscription will help solve the social issues in South Korea. She's stupid. She says it is forcing manhood on men. If men aren't going to be men, then who are going to be the men? Are the women going to be men? I don't think so. I don't think so. It is an unfortunate reality that men must be men no matter what. Who else will hold up civilization? Women won't. All they do is take and complain. Society will not find a new masculinity instead of anti-feminism. Feminism is just a cancer and it must be cut out. But finally, Park, of course, returns and says that men in their 20s are not part of the establishment, you know? He notes that if everyone could easily get a job and the economy was growing, then the need to fight against feminism would be lesser, would be weaker. But of course, women are taking jobs that they don't need. They're taking them away from the men. And it's the same thing that's happening across the Western world, and the younger generation, especially of men, have no tools but the internet, what we're using right now, to share their ideas. But that pretty much wraps my thoughts and report on the CNN article regarding feminism and young men. So guys, with that in mind, thank you very much for watching. I'm Brazen Eagle, and I hope you have a great day.